Welcome to the Jiu Jitsu of Life podcast. This is episode number 92.
Yo, brother Carter. Good
Anyway,
evening. How are you doing?
I like your shirt.
I like your shirt.
Team Gracious.
The new Jiu Jitsu of Life podcast uniform. I
Yeah,
tried to get you to wear the suit and tie.
yeah,
You're just like, nah, I'm
yeah.
sticking to my gun.
I
So
won. I won.
I'm the one that
Yeah,
had to convert. I had to convert to the gray t-shirt guy. I have to say, this is way more comfortable.
it's nice. It's
Yeah.
nice. Yeah. No, I don't mind the suit. I don't know if I'm crazy about the tie. Like that's one thing I'm not. Although I don't mind wearing a tie, but I feel like I could wear like a nice shirt and a sport jacket like every day and feel
Yeah.
good. But when I start going for the tie,
hmm
that becomes a little tougher for me.
Yeah.
A little bit.
Yeah.
I don't think I.
It can be a little stuffy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you like it. You sport it. You
I
actually go to
do.
the field.
I do.
Top-
Yeah, I like the tie, and I'm very big. I'm very big on the pocket square.
Oh, that's a nice
Yeah.
touch. That I've never done, but I
It
do.
is a nice touch,
I
man.
do
It is a
appreciate it.
nice touch.
Yeah,
People
yeah,
don't realize it's that little detail.
yeah.
And you got to know how to fold them. You can fold them kind of differently, and it just creates some personality. But man, I don't even know if I want to be recording this right now. So I don't know
That's good stuff,
why you
man.
took me down this road.
It's good stuff. No, I wonder if you has anybody ever ordered a rollbless gi that's like a suit with a little pocket square or anything
That's
like
cool. Now you're talking, man. See, that would probably rip during the roll though, because
that? Well,
we thought about pockets at one point.
no, it would be like just like a I don't know, like a patch or something like that. It wouldn't be an actual pocket square. Like you wouldn't have,
Oh, I got what you're saying, like a
or you'd
dummy
have
pocket.
that, and then underneath you'd have like a tie like
Ah,
vest, rash
look at
guard
this. That's a
guard that.
great idea.
Yeah,
That's a great
yeah.
idea. I love it.
Make this happen. I think the
Awesome,
very
brother.
limited design by Fisk rollbless line that lasted for about 3 weeks, and people are like, no one wants to wear this. Fire your.
Oh man, no, I like that. We might have to mess around with that idea,
Yeah,
even if it's just we'll make two for sure.
nice. There we go.
So, man, how was your week?
Man, it was good. Been looking at a lot of property. I've been looking at some very interesting Airbnb possibilities.
Mm-hmm.
I was telling you about the ranch, which could be an interesting spot for Airbnbs, weddings, yoga retreats, possibly jujitsu training for law enforcement. Or I was also thinking about this too. Why not? I mean, they do jujitsu camps already. Why don't we throw our own jujitsu camp?
I
Have
love
a
it.
place for like 35 people to stay,
I
plenty of
love it.
bathroom, tons of
Yep.
other fun stuff to do. If people are into like crazy dirt bike stuff and RV stuff, there's all that. There's longhorn cattle. There's shooting to be done. There's hiking. There's all sorts of beautiful stuff to do on 50 acres. Sounds like a good time.
That's
But
like the Ponderosa.
yeah, but I gotta make sure I keep with the discipline because as much as I'm like, oh, I'm just gonna be like Pablo Escobar and have my own playground, gotta make sure it makes financial sense. But
For sure.
I think it'd be interesting. So there's a lot of um, just trying to think creatively, trying to see what opportunities are there. I still definitely think the short-term rental market is something that's here to stay. I think it's something that makes good financial sense in the right circumstances. But I'm just being disciplined, making sure I go through the numbers, making sure I meet the right lenders on these situations too. So it'll take a little while, but I don't think there's a whole lot of buyers for something like this either. So I don't think it's a huge gold rush like it is for multifamily or something like that, where you literally have to make a deal that you might regret at a certain point because it's very fast and very rushed. So it was good. Went to my Think Multifamily conference up in Dallas on Saturday, which is cool. Got to see some of the people there. Andrew Zai, PhD, MMA fighter. Got to see him. Got to see a bunch of other people. And that group is actually, in sort of hindsight of the year, has done a lot of stuff. They've done, I forget how many deals. They've done like 14 deals this year. I think they raised about 50 million, 50 million in capital for deals
Nice.
in 1 year, which is
Money well spent. Money well spent then on the mentorship group.
yeah, I
Yeah.
think so for sure. I mean, I've had kind of mixed emotions at certain times, but when I get with the people, it is impressive. There's people that are doing a lot of really cool
And
stuff.
that's you and I speaking on the podcast and off the podcast. That's really what you're investing in
Yeah,
nowadays. You particularly is
yeah,
in people and in
Yeah,
relationships.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. So it's been it was good with that. I just met some good brokers along the way. So it's good. It was fun. Haven't been training much. That's the one thing that we were supposed to train today, and
Yeah.
then you flaked first, so I flaked second. But
Partners in crime, man. I tell you what,
yeah,
I wasn't feeling it.
yeah,
Um, so Texas, I'm gonna blame it on the allergies. My Texas
yeah,
allergies
yeah,
got you feeling down.
yeah,
But we're gonna get back on it. It's like anything else. It's a roller coaster, up and
yeah,
down. Sometimes, you'll have your months, and you know that, where your training's real consistent. Our group is real consistent. I mean,
yeah,
we've had a long run where it's just like
yeah,
every Sunday,
yeah. It's
we're
true.
there. But I think when we're missing it for the most part, sometimes it's just because we're being lazy, but sometimes it's because we're busy, and that's a good
Yeah,
thing. That's a
yeah.
good thing. Business is rocking and rolling.
I agree.
But because sometimes we're so busy, I get caught up during the week, and I know you were caught up during the week, that we don't get a chance to really discuss, well, what are we gonna talk about? Sometimes we
Yeah,
do, sometimes we don't,
yeah,
and this was one of the times where we didn't really get a chance to discuss what we're going to talk about. So I was kind of just reading through the news, and an article popped up, and I thought, man, this could be something that we discuss, because it really hits home with a lot of the things that we talked about regarding business.
yeah.
But when you take the rules and you apply them to jujitsu,
They fit. They fit like
they
almost perfectly.
fit.
Pretty cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And what it was an article from that I got off the Motley Fool, and it's the 12 investing tips from Charlie Munger that you need to hear. And we all know who Charlie Munger is, right? Is it
Just,
Munger or Munger?
just I'm gonna say Munger, but I could be
It's a
complete.
Munger. I think it's Charlie Munger,
Okay.
right?
So we were actually just talking about his boss before, a man named Warren Buffett, who people may have heard of, Berkshire Hathaway.
Who's that?
And what is good about this is, like you said, it's good business lessons, it's good life lessons, it's good jujitsu lessons as well. And it's a lot of stuff we've talked about on this podcast. So this means we are on our way to being the next Berkshire Hathaway. That's just good science.
You just put that out there
Yeah.
in the universe.
Yeah. A failed clothing company that Warren Buffett named his company after. That's quite.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, do you have the article?
I do. I do.
Fantastic. Let's kick it off. You kick it off.
All
Well,
right.
first
So
of all,
yeah.
so who maybe people are watching, they know Warren Buffett, but they may
Yeah.
not know who Charlie Munger is.
So he's one of his guys. He's one of his right hand men that's been with Berkshire for a long, long time. And what I think is so cool about what Warren Buffett does is, number one, obviously he's an investing genius, and he's just a person who's always had a great understanding of how companies work and how people work and people think and all that. But number two is that I think they've always been very good and forthcoming with their advice that they give. There's certain people that make tons of money that just they keep it to themselves. What I like what Buffett does and what Munger does as well is they give a lot of good advice, and for no reason, I think, really, other than just to give good advice. So like anything
I love
else,
it.
when you
Yeah.
see people that are top of the game, top of the food chain giving advice, it's definitely worth
I'm not going to
listening.
go off on a tangent, but again, it's something you see in jiu-jitsu. You ever
Yeah,
see that guy that he has a good move and he's tapping people out with it, and then people ask him, "Hey man, what did you just do? Can you teach that to me?" And they're like, "Oh, I didn't really know what I was doing. I
yeah,
was by luck or accident." Like
yeah,
they don't
it,
want to teach others what they're doing to be
yeah,
successful. And I
yep,
think that that's always next level,
yeah.
right? And so like in business, teaching others what you're doing to be successful, and in jiu-jitsu, you should be doing the exact same thing. My
I,
personal opinion.
I agree. I agree. So he's got 12. What is the official title? It's 12 investing tips from Charlie Munger that you need to hear. So, tip number one is those who keep learning will keep rising in life. So, this is something we've talked about a ton. One thing that we've tried to do is we always talk about books we're reading. I read a good one called Shut Up and Listen by Tillman Fertitta. I actually listened to it on the drive up to Dallas. Definitely worth listening to. It's only 3.5 hours. He owns the Houston Astros, but he owns a ton of like Bubba Gumps and Landry Steakhouses and all this stuff. All him. He's a guy from Katy, Texas, so he's got that good Southern drawl. Very good book. So we're always looking for things to read, things to study. I think that's something that
Yeah,
it's just important to keep doing, even if you don't necessarily get anything from whatever you're looking at. It's the very act of intentionally self-improving yourself at all times that I think is important. It's the
absolutely.
fact, just like we're doing the podcast. I
That's
don't
why the podcast started, wasn't it? I mean, we were
exactly.
just talking about business. That's all it was. And we were just kind of spitballing ideas here and there. How did your week go? How did my week go? What are you thinking? And I was learning way more from you than you probably were from me. But we
Gotcha.
decided, hey, why don't we
Yeah.
why don't we start recording these conversations?
Yep.
And same thing in jujitsu, right?
Yeah.
Like we've talked about this before, that you should never just even if you become an academy owner and you're the black belt and you're the professor at
Yeah.
that academy,
Yeah.
you should continue your education
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
because
Yeah.
that's how your students are going to get better.
Yeah, and the reality is too with business and jujitsu and things like that. In the world we live in today, things change so quickly that if you are not learning, you're falling behind.
Hey,
That's
yo, I
so.
like that. Yep.
You want to do number two?
Number two, knowing what you don't know is more useful than being brilliant.
I love this one.
That's a good one.
I like this a
That's a
lot.
good one.
Yeah.
Knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. But see, that's the thing though, is like figuring out what you don't figuring
Yeah.
out what you don't know, right? Like to me, that is a little bit of a learning through the process, right? Because when we started Robles, there was so much we didn't know.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you have to make these mistakes and then you know, but the
Yeah.
way to expedite that learning that I found is find a mentor that's already made all those mistakes,
Yeah.
and then he'll tell you what you don't know, and
Yeah.
it's up to you to listen. That's what a wise person's going to do. I'm going to tell you, people, your parents have said it, my parents have said it, and I've always, now I look back and I hate the term of sometimes you got to learn the hard way. No, you don't. Only dummies learn the hard way, right? And I was one of those dummies when I was younger. My parents would tell me, "Don't do this, son. I already made that mistake."
Yeah.
And I had to learn the hard way, and I
Yeah.
still did, and I learned the hard. And I just thinking to myself now, I would have been that much wiser of a person
Yeah.
if I would have just taken good advice that was
Yeah.
being given to me, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
That's
What are your
true.
thoughts on that?
I like it. I think that when we talk about outsourcing, when we talk about systems, replacing yourself, all that kind of stuff, it really comes down to knowing what you're good at, knowing what you're not good at, knowing what doesn't fit with your personality, knowing what you don't know. And for some people, this can be hard. There's people in life, and I know you've met them before, where it's like they never want to admit they don't know something. It's
Mm,
mind-boggling to me. And like, I think it's a younger person's thing too. I think when you're young and insecure, like you want to pretend that you're more sophisticated than you are, you know all these things. And I found as I get older, it's easier and easier to be like, I don't know what that is, and just not care. But when I was younger, I'd be like, oh yeah, I know what that is, and I'd have no idea. And there was no Google back then either, so I was extra dumb. But I think that it's very freeing to just sort of admit when you don't know something, because
absolutely.
it takes the burden away from trying to fake it, trying to do anything like that. And I found that by and large, most people are actually relatively helpful when you put them in the right circumstance. And by admitting you don't know something, it gives the other person a chance to be helpful and to feel important. So one could almost surmise that maybe pretending you don't know even more than you don't know could be helpful in a lot of situations, because it makes the other person feel important, and maybe it gets you what you want or whatever it
I
might
love
be.
that.
So, yeah.
I love that. Yeah. You got number three.
Number three, one of the greatest ways to avoid trouble is to keep it simple. Yes. What is it? KISS? Keep it simple, stupid?
Doc Snow would agree with this.
Yes.
Super
Um,
simple game,
yes.
but very, very effective.
Yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
it simple. Like,
Yeah.
why overcomplicate things?
Well, and the heat of chaos in could be jujitsu, could be life, whatever. If you know what your business really is, then it's a lot easier to deal with trouble, turbulent times, adversity, whatever it is. If you are overcomplicating what your business is, then it's harder to pitch it, it's harder to sell it, and a lot of times it can be harder to save it too, versus if you just understand the core of it, because then it's easier to pivot. So like, you're not in the jiu-jitsu gi business, you're in the customer service business, you're in the
Absolutely.
custom customer service business. So if that ever dried up, you could transition. We were just talking about the pocket square. You legitimately could transition to making custom suits and things like that, because you have a lot of that infrastructure already in place. You understand a lot of that. You have good taste in this kind of stuff. So it's not like, oh, I've got to be in the jiu-jitsu gi business. It's like, no, I'm in the I'm in a sort of a custom customer service, white glove type of business. So I think that kind of knowing what you're doing makes it a lot simpler. And then just for combat, having a simple game takes a certain amount of thought out of things and puts in feel much more than thought. It's much more creating a couple of bad options versus what they used to call Rolodex style jiu-jitsu, where you have like a whole Rolodex of techniques. You got to go through each individual one in your head before you figure out the right thing to do at the moment. By that point, it's already gone. But if you have a simple idea of like, I'm going to give them a couple bad options and know what to do when that's it. That's Jeff's game. That's Marcelo Garcia's game. That's all the great people in jiu-jitsu have that simplicity. Even if it looks complicated, usually there's sort of a simple core to it. So I like that one.
Love it. Love it. People calculate too much and think too little.
Yes.
Number 4.
Yeah.
I have been guilty of this from time to time.
I was doing it just earlier today.
We I don't know. I mean, that's another way of saying maybe paralysis by analysis.
It could be.
And not being decisive on things.
Yeah.
Is the way I kind of get into that, calculating too much.
Well, I see this a lot in real estate right now, especially. So in multifamily, everything is about calculating numbers and what's your ROI, what's your internal rate of return, all these different things. But thinking like further back, like thinking about the story of the property, the story of the town, does it really make sense that this is going to continue to expand? Is this real growth, or is this just like a boom in tourism that could easily dip? Like Waco's a good example.
And do you think that falls in line with when Grant Cardone says it's when I go there and I can feel it?
Yeah, I think so, because the numbers tell part of the story, but they never tell the whole story. And if you're just fixated on the numbers and never thinking about, what kind of, I'll give the example of Waco, because I was just in Waco, and I think there's a lot of good things happening in Waco, and I may be investing in Waco soon. But a lot of Waco's recent boom is tourism. It's Chip and Joanna Gaines from Fixer Upper. Now, that show, actually didn't know, is actually already off the air. They have like their own network that's coming on soon and things like that. But let's say this network doesn't do well, and let's say it just goes off the air, whatever it does, and all that. Will the tourism continue? Are people going to be so enthralled with this place that they're going to keep going? Or is it something where maybe it peaked over the last couple of years and now it's going to go down? And now this idea of buying, an Airbnb and things like that, now you've got Baylor and you've got the SpaceX company, you've got some stuff, but maybe not quite as much stuff. So is this long-term growth, or is this just sort of a bump in tourism? Like, what makes more sense? Versus just looking at the numbers and the return that you can get and being like, oh, this is, and really getting so far into the woods on that and so detailed that you don't back up for a minute and say, let's look at the bigger picture and say, does this make sense on more of a sort of sociological level? Because you're still dealing with people moving. And I
love that. And that's when people talk about Warren Buffett and I don't know, his greatness when it comes to investing. A lot of that is because he does invest in people, right? Yeah. When he's evaluating a business, he looks at who's running the business and he's like, that's why the business is great. So not only am I going to buy the business, but I want to keep you in place. Mm-hmm. And so it's understanding the people. And if the right people aren't there, it's being able to move those right people into that business and get it where it needs to be, which he has been very good at doing that. That's almost like a coaching thing.
It is. I agree. It's like you're scouting out talent. That's what he's doing.
That's what you're doing. You're looking at relationships right now and looking at people much more than you are looking at the deal. Yes, and so
exactly.
That one really hits home for you.
It does.
Number 5. I think that's on you.
That was me. Okay. We have 3 baskets for investing. Yes, no, and too tough to understand.
Yeah, for me in business, that one's a lot more simple. But this really hits home for me when it comes to jiu-jitsu, because that's how I think about my jiu-jitsu. I think about, yes, I understand it. Yes. No, I don't. Or the third one, it's too tough to understand. I'm just going to go back to what I kind of know. And that doesn't mean that I'm not learning new and different things. I think I've taken from what Ryan Shinto has said, and I know you have told me this several times, is that even if you're not going to use a technique, try to understand the technique. So that way you can better defend it, right? So
Yeah.
maybe you're not going to. And I remember when you and I were discussing the Berimbolo, I was like, I don't know if that's my kind of game. But you were like, you should still understand the concepts behind it. So when
Yeah.
it's happening, you know how to react
Yes.
to it, right?
Yeah.
So, but at the
Yeah.
end of the day, I invest in what I really, really understand.
Yeah. And I think that's important. I mean, it's there's so many ways to make money. There's so many businesses that almost every business you can imagine it has successful people. Almost every town you go to has at least a couple of successful people in it. But that doesn't mean that every business in every town is right for you. It has to be something that resonates. It has to be something that makes sense, that feels right to a certain degree. Because there can be some things that, yes, this is a good thing, but if you're never really gonna understand it, you shouldn't do it. I mean, it's too risky. There's already too many risks when it comes to investing in business anyway. But if you're doing something that you really just don't understand, that's risky. You need to know your business. So yeah, I like the way they just make it very simple. Like it's a yes or it's no. It's too tough to understand. So it's a nice way of organizing things so that you can make decisive decisions. I think that's important.
I love that. Number 6, a great business at a fair price is superior to a fair business at a great price. I like that.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know if that kind of is just reiterating almost investing in people, because I feel that's what makes great businesses.
It
Um,
does.
but I also think it's also hinting at looking at what you were talking about in Waco. Is this a short-term thing or is this
Yeah.
a long-term thing? And
Yeah.
so when I'm evaluating the investment, I'm looking at a good business versus a great business. A great
Yeah.
business is going to be something that's going to be here like Coca-Cola.
Yeah.
It's iconic. It's going to be here forever. M&M's. It's going to be here forever.
Yeah.
And I don't need to have 100 of those. I just need to have maybe just one of those.
Yeah.
Just hit one of those home runs, and I think you're pretty successful. Tell me how that would apply to jujitsu.
So um, that's a good question. So I think I would look at it in a couple ways, but I think the main way that we've talked about before is I think it's much better to find a training situation that is convenient, that you can do consistently. Find training partners that you actually like, that you get along with, that you want to hang out with. I think it's much better to find that and invest in those people versus I have to find the perfect training place, even if it's an hour away. I have to find, these guys are the best guys in the state or the best guys in my city, even though I really can't stand them. Um, it's better to do. It's better for the situation. So, in other words, I'd much rather be in a training situation with people that aren't as good in a place that I know I can go to consistently with people that I enjoy and I like, because given that there will be consistency, and given consistency, talent will develop. You'll get good people, you'll get good training partners, and you'll be in a situation you can keep going to versus let's say it's a perfect place and they're great people and they're great at jiu-jitsu, but I don't like them and it's an hour away. Well, what happens if, you start having to work more, different things in life happen, you're going to stop going. Like as soon as something changes, as soon as something gets tougher, you're going to stop going. And now you're not training or you're not training consistently, you're not going to get as good. So I think it's much better to invest in that. And if it comes down to literally putting mats in your own garage and doing that, if that's what you have to do, then that's what you have to do. You'll still get better that way versus seeking perfection.
You got number 7.
I got number 7. Success means being very patient but aggressive when it's time. I like this one a lot. I'm gonna flip it. I'm gonna go with jiu-jitsu first on this one.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna talk about a little bit of awesome possum for a minute. Because I was watching a little Preet Nicholson today, watching his Mount Escape video that he did about a month ago. I love that man's instructions. And what I love about it is I put myself in a position where I can be patient. The other guy really can't hurt me. But then when there's that moment of opportunity, I take it, I snatch it. So I'm a sniper. I'm waiting. There's a target, boom. No hesitation when there's that moment.
Decisive.
But it's like waiting for that moment, being decisive when that moment comes, versus I'm doing all this movement, I'm doing all these unnecessary things, I'm tiring myself out, I'm not sure what I'm looking for, versus no, I'm going to put myself in a situation where I can feel everything, feel that moment that person overcommits, and then I'm going to move. And that's how you develop sensitivity. That's how you do jiu-jitsu when you're really old, when you're dealing with a bunch of young stallions. This is the way to beat them.
I love it. I love it. This rule really reminds me of a fundamental that I've heard Warren Buffett say lots of times in a lot of his different speeches to college students and entrepreneurs all over the world, which is the beautiful thing about
Yeah,
technology nowadays, right? Like back in the day, we couldn't learn about anything that Warren
yeah,
Buffett had to say. Maybe he wrote a book and you'd read it,
yeah,
but now you can just get on YouTube and
yeah,
look at all the speeches. It's
yeah.
amazing.
It is.
And in just about every speech, he says in investing, there's no call strikes like baseball,
Yeah, yeah,
right? You can pitch as much as you want to me, and I never have to swing,
yeah,
right? And I
yeah,
only have to swing at the perfect pitch.
yeah,
So that way it almost guarantees a home run. And he goes, the great thing about investing is I don't need 100 home runs to become fairly wealthy. I just maybe need two or three.
yeah.
And so you can be patient. You don't have to swing. And there's a lot of people out there that they just feel like they need to be doing something. Well, I'm
Yes.
not doing nothing. I heard Carter today was out in Waco and Lago Vista and Marble Falls, and he's
Yeah,
looking at investing. And what am I doing? I'm just sitting at home.
yeah,
You don't need to worry about what other people are doing. You need
yeah,
to just stay focused and really wait for that perfect pitch. And
yeah,
you only need two or three of them. And I think when it's coming from Warren Buffett himself, I mean, it doesn't get better than that.
yeah. I think that's a huge thing because there's the huge fear of missing out.
Yes.
There is, as much as I love being in sort of the investing community, there is like a lot of peer pressure. I mean, I was around a lot of people yesterday that it's like, man, these guys are doing a ton of stuff. And you start feeling like, what am I doing? Why am I not doing whatever? Versus, I know what I'm looking for. I am not going to rush it. I'm not going to feel because nobody's watching. This is something that I'm doing that is for me and my family and maybe the people around me. This is to better my life and better other people's lives. And I want to do it the correct way. And needlessly swing, like you're saying, like needlessly swinging on pitches that you don't need to swing on, that's unnecessary. But I think the more preparation you do, the more patience you have. When you see that correct opportunity, you will be able to pounce on it and really be able to pounce on it without having any second thoughts because you've been spending a lot of time prepping and knowing what you're looking for. Obviously, there's a thin line between this and analysis paralysis, but I think that if you're being specific in what you're looking for, it will appear at the right time. I do believe it. So,
Love it.
nice.
Is number 8 me or you?
I
Let's say.
think it's you.
After you read it, you're like, yeah, it's yours.
No, no, it's good.
Number 8,
It's actually,
the big money is not in buying and the selling, but in the waiting.
yeah.
I'm not sure if that's more of the same.
It's similar. I think it's very similar to what he's saying. I mean, it's the idea of patience. It's the idea that there and actually that Tillman Fertitta guy was saying something very, very similar when I was listening to his book yesterday, where the idea is like there's always going to be another deal coming.
Mm-hmm.
Like this idea of like, you just have to get this. He's like, I've been in business for 35 years. I've done a ton of deals. Like there's always another deal coming, but you have to prepare yourself and be patient and know what you're looking for. Because if you're just like, I've got to get a deal done, that's like the worst thing. That's one of the worst mentalities you can have because that's how people, like I've seen people do some crazy bad deals before. I've heard people say things like, I just want to sign this thing, get it over with. I'm like, you're signing away like 4 or 5 years of your life committing to something and you don't even know what you're committing to. Like that's crazy to me. Like there's so it's.
I told you about that in confidence. I didn't think
but and it's so it's amazing. Like so having that patience is important and it can be tough because if
and I think that's the underlying fundamental of Buffett's investing is
yeah
patience.
yeah
If there's one fundamental, it is that
yeah
being ultra patient.
yes yes
And I think in jiu-jitsu is the same thing. You see people, I mean, I'll take myself for example, and this is a lot of people that I've talked to, especially when you're brand new, you want to get good so fast,
yeah
right?
yeah
And not understanding that to get good at anything requires dedication, but it requires an enormous amount of patience,
it does
right?
it does yeah. This next one I really like. Number 9, you must force yourself to consider opposing arguments, especially when they challenge your best loved ideas. This is important. This is important, I think, whenever you look at any deal. There's always the idea of looking
This
at the
is you.
upside,
This is all you.
looking at the downside of the deal, and then asking yourself, can I live with the downside? And that's really important because the upside is always the fun part. It's the fantasy part. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to make all this money. I'm going to do all these things. Got to look at the downside. So I'm looking at, like I said, a lot of Airbnb stuff in Waco and Marble Falls and things like that. So the first thing I'm thinking about with Waco, I'm like, wow, there's been this huge tourist boom. I think it was 2008. There's 2.5 million people came as tourists to Waco, versus back in 2013 it was like 400,000 or 500,000. So 5 times as many in 5 years. That's great. What goes up can also come down, though. Who's to say that by 2023 it's not down to 500,000 again? Is there that much? Because is tourism really a sustained thing? Or is it something where people get interested in it because there was a TV show, and once the TV show goes off the air, maybe that's it. Now the demand for the Airbnb decreases. Now, can I do anything else with this property? Or is it something where it's like, basically I've got a vacant hotel that nobody wants anymore, and now I got a huge bunch of debt on it? That is something to consider. Can I live with that? What would be my monthly payments? Like how long could I conceivably hold on to this thing before I would have to sell it at a loss? And then doing that, the same thing with the Marble Falls property. And that's actually an interesting idea of, is it better to go for the great deal in the so-so location or the so-so deal in the great location? And that's kind of an argument for the second part, because if the great location is not going to be nearly as affected by the downturn, maybe that's the spot to invest in the long term. So really considering the downsides, really there's a lot of people that talk about try and kill the deal, try and talk yourself out of the deal, go through every possible parameter. Historically speaking, I believe this is what was done during I want to say it was the Cuban Missile Crisis, where Kennedy divided up people in his cabinet and he had them argue the counterpoint. So it was like whatever you would think, you'd have to argue the counterpoint. Like really doing that, I think, is a great exercise in something.
That's critical thinking.
Exactly. So you're applying critical thinking or something like that, because it's very easy to get excited about the upside on something. Now for Jiu-Jitsu, we can also talk about this for learning from new techniques, buying new videos, doing different things that seem super exciting versus sticking with the fundamentals, deciding that a certain position is super good or super bad, versus what are the bad, so for instance, back to the awesome possum stuff, giving up your back is bad and terrible. Well, no, it's not necessarily. It's one of these things that maybe there's some good to it. Maybe there's some versatility to it. Maybe it gets you out of considerably worse positions. There's a lot of sort of nuanced arguments that can be made on something like that. It's not necessarily as black and white as it's many times taught to be. So I like that. My dog has just entered the room. You're number 10.
Awesome. Number 10 is don't drift into self-pity because it doesn't solve any problems. Generally speaking, envy, resentment, revenge, and self-pity are disastrous modes of thought. This one I love. It's a huge fundamental for anyone wanting to get in business, and I think it really applies to people who are in combat sports, because this one has to deal with a lot of, life is going to hit you hard.
Yes.
There's going to be struggles along the way.
Yeah.
And I've said this time and time again on other podcasts that we've done. The difference between being champ and number one is usually who has the stronger mental fortitude, who is able to persevere, right? Yeah. Are you going to be the person that is like, woe is me, I lost everything? If you look at a lot of the industrial pioneers back in the days of the robber barons, a lot of those guys not went bankrupt one time, but like several times.
It's crazy.
And continued to come back and risk it all, right? Like they didn't just say, well, I gave it my best shot and I lost everything and I'm done. They kept going and going and going. So it's perseverance is a fundamental for success. And I absolutely think it's a fundamental for jiu-jitsu. It goes without saying. I mean, there's what is that meme that says black belt is just a white belt that never gave up. And I
Yeah.
definitely believe that's going to be true if I stay alive in my case, right? Like I'm not trying to get my black belt, but I'm showing up every year,
Yeah.
and they're going to keep handing me belts as long as I continue to progress. And I'm going to continue to show up every year because not because of the belt, but just because of I enjoy it. But having that consistency and not giving up. I mean, there were plenty of days. There was a time I hurt my knee. There was a time I hurt my neck. I
Yeah.
didn't hurt my
That's
neck. Carter hurt my neck. And I could have been like, man, this is for the birds. I'm not doing like I don't want to do this, but I love jujitsu so much, and I didn't want to, I didn't want to have a pity party. I was like, you know what? I need just to keep going. I need to go. I need to persevere, and that's what it takes in business. That's what it takes in jujitsu. If anything, I recommend anyone who wants to get into business to do jujitsu because if you're not
yes.
mentally
Yeah.
tough, if you're emotionally soft,
Yeah.
jujitsu will toughen you up.
Yeah.
And that mental fortitude, you can carry it over to business. And you have a bad day in business, it's nothing compared to the pressure you feel when you're underneath someone like Doc Snow.
Yeah. Business always feels more hopeful and possible than
Yes, yeah.
that's
It seems like there's a way out. Exactly. There's a way out.
yeah.
There's no way out when
It didn't feel like there
that
is.
grizzly bear gets a hold of you.
Yes. I like that. I like that. Number 11 is
Uh-huh.
invert. Always invert.
I think about Top Gun when I hear this.
Yeah.
Inverted.
Because I was inverted. That's such
Yeah.
a scene. Still a solid film. I actually watched it recently and I was like, God, I can still quote almost this entire movie. So, and Maverick, I think, comes out next year too.
Yeah, man. I hope they don't I hope they don't mess up that the original.
Anthony Edwards' legacy. I agree.
Just hurtful. Just a hurtful person.
I know. Um, so I like this. Basically, my sort of reading of this, and I'm not sure if this is correct or not, but and it says like it can be useful to look at a problem in reverse. So the idea of like reverse engineering something.
I love it.
I think and I do that all the time in jiu-jitsu. I think it's important. You can even start with the end in mind, like start with the submission and then work backwards and figure out how did this happen? Like, and because a lot of times people, even if they're getting tapped out with different things, a lot of times it's sort of the same basic thing that's allowing them to start down that path of losing, basically. And if you can start figuring those things out, you can prevent it happening from a lot sooner. Or conversely, you can also figure out how you're already getting an advantage on somebody much earlier on than you think. I was training with somebody a couple months ago. I don't know the guy's name, but and I got him in something at some point. And I started off with a little possum action. And he goes, whenever I caught him and whatever I caught him, he goes, well, did you plan on getting that the whole time? And I was like, well, no, but I figured you would probably overcommit, and that's going to lead to a couple possibilities there, and this is one of them. So it's not like I was like, oh, I'm going to choke you with this move or whatever, but it was like, oh, I know that most people, especially if they haven't dealt with this system before, they're going to at some point overcommit. That's probably going to mean that I'm going to sweep them, and I'm probably going to take them back, their back, or do something from there. So it's reverse engineering that. In business, I think it's important to do you can study the businesses that fail and see why they fail. It's there's so many common things. A huge one is businesses expanding too quickly. That happens throughout history. That happens all the time. I see that, I think, happening in multifamily right now, where the concern seems to be to get as big as possible, as fast as possible, versus a lot of them, it's like, I don't even know if you know how to really run a property correctly yet. Like everything's about buying and buying and buying and acquiring as much as you can, versus you have to run this correctly. And that gets more and more difficult and logistically complicated the bigger you get. And the reason you're buying these things most of the time is because they're not run properly. So if you're not changing that, I don't care what color you're painting things or what you're doing to the road, the roof, or like what sort of cool like amenities you're adding to something. If you're not running it correctly, you're still going to sink your ship sooner or later. So I think it's important to kind of study why a business fails. And I think it's also important to study the ones that have been successful, especially if you have the opportunity to check out things that have been successful throughout recession. That to me is the ultimate test of a business. Like, how did it do in 2006, 7, and 8? And what are they doing to prepare for the next one? Because a lot of people talk about that, but the ones that actually were able to get through that intact, that I think is something to reverse engineer and see what they did.
I
So,
love it.
yeah,
And finally, we get to number 12. And Charlie Munger says, spend each day trying to be a little wiser than you were when you woke up. Discharge your duties faithfully and well. Step by step, you get ahead, but not necessarily in fast spurts. But you build discipline by preparing for fast spurts. Slug it out 1 inch at a time, day by day. At the end of the day, if you live long enough, most people get what they deserve. And it goes on to say the passage needs no explanation. So to quote Munger one final time, I have nothing further to add. I think it's really
yeah,
self-explanatory.
yeah,
And to me, this really reminds me about boxing. This is
yeah,
boxing.
yeah,
It's just, I think the greatest fighters never thought about winning the entire fight. I think you get to a point where you're just like, I'm gonna win the next round, and then it gets down to the point of I'm gonna win the next exchange,
yeah,
exchange by exchange by
yeah,
exchange, and you just keep one foot in front of the other and keep slugging away. Bite down on your mouthpiece, keep your chin down, keep your hands up, and keep throwing that leather.
yeah,
And if you live long enough, you'll eventually get what you want. But it comes down to patience, perseverance. All of those fundamentals come back into play.
yeah, yeah. It's funny. Just to hop on that one more little bit, I remember listening to Marcelo Garcia talking about jiu-jitsu, and he said, if you're in a scramble, make sure you're the one person who does the last move. Just get that one more move in. That one more movement will most of the time win the scramble.
Oh man, I
And
like that idea. That's
it's
great.
it's an interesting idea because it's like sometimes at the highest levels it comes down to that. To me, a great example was the fight last night of Colby Covington and Kamaru Usman. I mean, that was a great fight. That was a very close fight. But I think that what I saw is a lot of times Usman would throw that one last punch in the exchange, do that one last thing. It's like a rough, crazy exchange, boom, 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 boom. He throws that last punch. He like does that little extra bit. And that to me is one of the things that helped him win that fight. So, that sort of ability to do that consistently, like they say, when no one's watching, I think that's what ultimately gets people ahead. Sometimes it doesn't feel like it at the moment, but I think that's ultimately what works. So, good advice from a very successful
Boom.
man.
I love it.
Charlie.
Episode 92 in the books. Be
Yeah,
sure to check out the jujitsuoflife.com so you can check out this podcast, our older podcast. Also, be sure to go to Apple iTunes, leave us a great review. And as always, be sure to go to robles.com, makers of the world's finest custom jiu-jitsu apparel. From myself and Carter, as always, we wish you guys nothing but the best, both on and off the mat. Have a great week, guys.
thank you.